Welcome to a special edition of The Grueling Truth as we cover the top 10 conference championship games in NFL history, brought to you by Gridiron Mo. Check out Gridiron Mo at www.gridironmo.com. As always, I'm your host, Mike Goodpaster, and I want to welcome in my co-host, Matt Andrews-Scavage. How you doing tonight, Matt?
Doing real good, Mike.
Tonight, in honor of the conference championship games this weekend, we're picking our top 10 of all time. We did these, I believe, from Super Bowl I to now, conference championships, 66, 67, 68, 69. I think we're still called the AFL Championship, NFL Championship. We're just going to act like it's the AFC Championship and the NFC Championship. So you want to start us off with your number 10?
Sure. I had to leave off a few games on my list, but I felt like these were the most exciting games that I ever watched. I'm going to start with the 1991 AFC Championship game between Buffalo and Denver. Absolute dogfight. You and I have talked about this game many times. Very, very underrated game. John Elway versus Jim Kelly. It was a defensive struggle. A lot of times these games get left off lists because they're not real exciting with a lot of scoring. But in the snow, in the bitter cold, I believe Buffalo's only touchdown was a sack fumble. And they ended up winning the game 10-7. Real close game. The 91 Broncos, kind of in the mold of John Elway's Bronco teams that ended up going to the Super Bowl in 86, 87, and 89. Very similar team. Just fell a little bit short to Buffalo. Buffalo, one of the greatest offenses of all time. Very good team. And this was just a classic duel between two Hall of Fame quarterbacks.
Yeah, I think it's the game where Elway got hurt. Gary Kubiak actually came in at the end of the game, and I think he even led them on their touchdown drive, didn't he?
I don't remember who scored on the touchdown drive. That one
I'm pretty sure. And then they got the onside kick back, but then I think they threw an interception around midfield. It was a game that just barely missed my list, but it was a great game, very hard-hitting game. I think a lot of people forget, especially those first two Buffalo Super Bowl teams, how good their defense was. You know, I think Shane Conlon was still there and healthy at the time. Cornelius Bennett, of course, Bruce Smith. Great football team. Denver, was Wade Phillips the coach then?
I believe that Dan Reeves was still the coach, but Wade Phillips may have been on the staff.
All right. Well, my number 10.
It could have been Wade Phillips.
My number 10, I'm going to go back to the year I was born, which was 1968. Jets and Raiders. The New York Jets beat them 27-23. Joe Montana threw an interception early in the fourth quarter that enabled Oakland to take the lead. Or Joe Namath, whatever. All them Joes run together. But Namath leads them 68 yards in like 55 seconds to score a go-ahead touchdown pass to Don Maynard with 7 minutes left in the game. Jets defense steps up, makes three huge stops to tear. Three different times Oakland had the ball in the last 7 minutes with a chance to drive down, win the game, bailed on everyone. That was also the same year, the regular season game, the infamous Heidi game. And to tell you what the NFL was back then, if you look at the numbers for the quarterbacks, Joe Namath was 19 of 49 for 266 yards, 3 touchdowns and an interception. Darryl LaMonica, the Oakland quarterback, was 20 of 47 for 401 yards and a touchdown. Fred Biletnikoff had one of his great games ever with 7 receptions for 190 yards and a touchdown. And Maynard was the big star on the other side with 6 catches for 118 yards and a score. All in all, I think it's a forgotten game. It seems like people remember the Heidi game more. And I would bet you even that a lot of people think the Heidi game was actually a playoff game. So my number 10... Yeah, my number 10 is the New York Jets and the Oakland Raiders. Do you have them anywhere, or did you completely lift them off?
They didn't make my list. They didn't make my list. I had a feeling it might make yours, but it is definitely it's deserving. You know, to me, it would probably make my top 15. I felt like there were a few games that were better, but the AFL doesn't get enough credit. Darryl LaMonica especially. That my opinion, the 67 Oakland team is the best AFL team that ever lived. Maybe the 63 Chargers, but it's definitely between those two.
Chiefs. 69 Chiefs.
Ooh, see, I like the 68 Chiefs even better.
Nah, 69 were better. They won. 68 Chiefs got destroyed in the playoffs, I believe, by Oakland, didn't they? Like 41-6.
Yeah, they didn't have a really great playoff game, but may have been the better roster. But either way, I like that. I like that 67 Raider team. But either way, Jets Raiders, good. It was a good championship. Two very good teams, and definitely was a close one. But yeah, a lot of people do think the Heidi game was the championship game.
Well, it's easy to get it mixed up because they only talk about the Heidi game normally.
Yeah.
All right, we'll go to my number 9, which is one of my favorite games, involved one of my favorite quarterbacks, Brett Favre. A little joke. If anybody's listening to the show, they know he's not one of my favorite quarterbacks, but what the hell. I'm going to go with the 2009 NFC Championship game between Minnesota and New Orleans. Great game that the Saints won 31-28 in overtime. Probably best remembered for Brett Favre turning the ball over. Brett Favre had a tendency to turn the ball over in big cases. Huh?
Definitely. It's actually my number 9 as well. And I got a tie. I got a little tie there. I'm kind of cheating. I've got because there's so many of these games, I've got the 07 and the 09 kind of tied at number 9, both Brett Favre moments in overtime where he didn't
Well, actually, the 07 game didn't make mine, so we can kind of talk about Brett Favre's failures in both of those games if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's definitely worthy. The 07 game wasn't as good as the 09 game, but it definitely had the drama, and it was kind of Eli Manning's. That was probably his biggest win up to that point. The Dallas game was good, but that was still kind of a game where you could go, well, they're division rivals, anything could happen. But I don't think a lot of people were expecting Eli Manning to take the Giants into Lambeau in the cold and win there. I think a lot of people were expecting Favre to go back to the Super Bowl. And, they had every chance because Lawrence Tyne missed the field goal, and they get a fresh start.
And then they turned the ball over like 5 times in that game?
Who's that, the Giants?
No, I thought you went ahead to the...
Yeah, well, you're talking about the Saints. You're talking about the Saints game. Well, the Saints game, Adrian Peterson ended up fumbling. He ended up fumbling like 3 or 4 times, but he never lost a fumble. But Favre threw 2 interceptions. I remember Bernard Berrien fumbled late in the fourth quarter. The Saints were able to force, they kind of forced turnovers the entire year. And it was just one of those back and forth games. But then, of course, Favre definitely had a chance to win. If he just tucks it and runs for 5 yards, they probably win the game on a field goal. But he throws across his body right to Tracy Porter, and then Saints ended up winning the coin toss in overtime and kicking the field goal.
Right. You want to go ahead and go to your number 8?
My number 8. Well, I had a really tough time, but I ended up moving off one of the forgotten games in favor of. I kind of just took all 3 of Jim Harbaugh's NFC Championship game appearances because all 3 were really good games. You had
here we go with the homer
first
stuff.
One.
Go ahead.
You had the first one against the Giants. It was a real close game between. You got the 2 turnovers by Kyle Williams, which set up Eli Manning. The 2 big throws to Vernon Davis for the 49ers scores, and just a really hard-fought defensive game. Then you had in 2012, which ended up sending them to the Super Bowl, down 17-0 in Atlanta. They come back and they win 28-24. Still the largest margin of victory on a comeback in NFL history, down 17-0 and come back to win. Real good championship game. And then 2013 at Seattle, real hard-fought game. Came down to the last play again. So hard for me to leave those off. All very exciting games. So I'm going to pick those.
All right, my number 8. Yeah, my number 8 is the 1967 NFL Championship game between Green Bay and Dallas. That would be the Ice Bowl, 9 below. I remember hearing a story about how the officials were unable to use their whistles after the opening kickoff, and referee Norm Schachter blew his metal whistle to start the signal of play. It froze to his lips. As he attempted to rip it take it from his lips, the skin actually ripped off and began to bleed. I believe this is the game that solidified to me how great Bart Starr was, because people don't really remember. They just remember quarterback sneak, no big deal. But that team was behind. They come down in their last offensive drive. They took over possession at their own 32 with 4:50 left. The wind chill was probably 30 or 40 degrees below zero. Made some big passes, especially a 13-yard pass over to Boyd Dowler over the middle. And then you come up with the quarterback sneak to win the game. But, I mean, all in all, I think Bart Starr proved how great he was on that final drive.
Oh, definitely. I've got this game higher, but so I'll talk about it more in depth as well. But, yeah, like you said, given the conditions and what they had to do to go win the game, definitely proved how good Bart Starr was. He was, there's a good portion of his career, and it's just because of the way the game was back then. He was largely a game manager, but later in his last couple of years, after Horning and Taylor left the team, he was definitely asked to do a lot more. And on that final drive, it was Jerry Kramer that said, if people ask me what was it like in my era, what was it, how would you describe the 60s Packers? He always would say, go take a look at that drive, the last drive in the Ice Bowl. That was my team. That defines what the Lombardi Packers were.
Well, what are we at now? Number 7, correct?
7, yes.
I'm going to go with the drive.
Go ahead.
I'm going to go with the drive. Number 7, 1986 AFC Championship. Denver in overtime, 23-20 over Cleveland. And just like that solidified Bart Starr, the game before we talked about in 67, I think this really solidified John Elway, who had already made a history of comebacks. I mean, even starting from his first year in 83 against Baltimore. But in a span of 5 minutes and 2 seconds, led his team 98 yards, I think 14 or 15 plays, to tie the game with 37 seconds left. They go on to win in overtime. I think Rich Carlos was their kicker, who was kicking barefoot at the time in 20-degree weather, which I never understood why guys wanted to kick in their bare feet, but they don't anymore. So maybe people, they always say people were tougher back then. Maybe they're smarter nowadays since they don't do that.
Yes, I'm going to go with the latter on that one. I've never really got the whole barefoot thing.
Yeah, but I mean, the drive was also featured in the movie Hot Tub Time Machine, so it was a big deal.
There you go. Yeah, I've got this game a little bit higher, but this was definitely John Elway's coming out party. I mean, he had a couple of big moments from 83 to 85, but this was the big playoff moment where the Dog Pound is a very underrated team. Bernie Kosar's Browns. Very good team that could have won to the Super Bowl on 3 occasions, but it was. Yeah,
I think it is. I think it's a good argument to be made that both of those teams were more complete, better teams and would have put up better games in the Super Bowl, but John Elway was just a lot better than Bernie Kosar.
Exactly. I think the Browns were better.
And Dan Reeves was a really underrated coach.
Yes. Yeah, and he proved it later by, taking a team like Atlanta, out of the ashes to a Super Bowl in '98. That was a good coach.
Yeah. But, all right, what's your number 7?
My number 7 is the 1990 NFC Championship game, 14-2 49ers against the 13-3 Giants. Both those teams, I believe, were like 10-1 when they met in the regular season. I remember it was a 7-3 dogfight on Monday Night Football. And really, if you watch both games, they're almost identical. Just very, very defensive game, very hard fought in the trenches. Giants kicked all field goals, and just that was largely how they played that year. Very much built on ball control, limited turnovers, and kind of really relied on the defense. The Niners weren't really able to get a lot of offense going. I mean, they did have John Taylor scored in both of those games. But, leading 13-12, you got the sense that maybe the Niners are going to be able to run out the clock. But, Joe Montana gets hurt. Steve Young was able to make a couple of plays, but Giants defense was real good, and then they were able to get that crucial Roger Craig turnover at the end to set them up for the field goal.
All right. I actually have that one slightly higher. I actually thought I would have it in my top 2 or 3 until I rewatched it the other day. It wasn't as great as what I remembered, but it was cool watching Joe Montana get knocked unconscious pretty much and then the Niners losing. But that is from my own selfish perspective. But you probably knew that was coming. My number 6 is 1975. The Pittsburgh Steelers, 1975, Pittsburgh 16, Oakland 10. If you remember, that's the game where the field was basically an ice rink because I don't think Pittsburgh covered it, which pissed off Oakland. Actually, kind of a boring game in the first half, very violent though. Second half, much better game, and the difference ended up being that Franco Harris, I think he scored a touchdown on a 6-yard TD pass. Plus, I think he might have got another touchdown later on or set him up field goal with a 21-yard run. So to me, the 1975 Pittsburgh Steelers over the Oakland Raiders would be my number 6 game.
It didn't make my top 10, but it was close. It's one of those games where Pittsburgh really never relinquished the lead. But like you said, it was a hard-fought game, and that was the game where they left the tarp on, and it just turned the field into an ice rink. It was probably the best Steeler-Raider game from the playoffs overall, other than maybe the Immaculate Reception, just because of
it was a better game than the Immaculate Reception, though. I mean, the Immaculate Reception was basically, that was basically the Stabler run at the end of the game, and then the Immaculate Reception
2 plays.
itself. But other than that,
right. This one had a little bit more to it.
Yeah, plus I think both teams were a little bit better, too, the 3 years later.
Yeah.
Or actually a lot
That's just it. The Steelers were, the 75 Steelers, that was probably their, the 75, 76, and 78 teams were by far their 3 best teams of the 70s.
Well, I think 75, 76 were more defensive teams, where the 70, 78, 79 teams were more of offensive machines.
Right after they changed the rules.
Yeah, and the thing is this, we talk about the New England Patriots with their 5 straight conference championships. This was right in the middle of the Oakland Raiders doing the same thing. Only won one Super Bowl during the time. But then again, New England's only won 1 in that period of time, going for 2. So
Right.
My number 5, I'm going to go ahead and piggyback and pick this one up because I got the 1990 NFC Championship game between the Giants and Niners. Very violent game. All those teams seemed like they always played, just knockdown, drag-out games. Basically, the turning point was Roger Craig fumbling the ball. Steve Young had come in the game. He completed a pass over midfield. Can't remember who it was to. It might have been John Taylor, but I'm not sure. Maybe you remember a little bit better.
I want to say it was John Taylor or Mike Sherrard.
Okay. It was one of the 49ers receivers he completed a pass to. They were actually, I think when Craig fumbled the ball, they were really close to being in field goal range, too. I think they were down around the 35.
Yes.
But
they really could have just run the clock out.
Yeah, and then Jeff Hostetler comes back, makes a couple nice plays. You get Barr kicks the field goal to win the game, and I was really happy because I really enjoy when the 49ers lose. We will get to Matt's number 5 after we take a word and check out this commercial from Gridiron Mo. All right, we're back on the Grueling Truth's top 10 conference championship games of all time. Matt, we're up to your number 5.
Actually, I never did my number 6, but that's all right because it was the drive. And
okay. Well, you could talk about it a little bit because that's the same reason why I just jumped up to 5 real quick.
Well, I kind of had a tie with the. It was really hard to leave off the Ernest Biner fumble game as well. It was 2 really good football games, back-to-back years. Browns, Broncos. Like you said, you were talking about the drive. Really nasty conditions. And you watch that 98-yard drive. It's definitely one of the best drives you'll ever watch. And I think there was at least a 4th and 10 play, and I think he hit Mark Jackson for like 20 yards or something like that. And then you watch the throw. I think it was like an 8-yard touchdown pass, something like that.
The one where he threw it exactly where it had to be thrown, and any place else it probably would have been picked off, or at least incomplete.
Absolutely, but you got the velocity of the touchdown pass that just kind of goes between about 2 defenders, and what a fantastic catch Just kind of, because it easily could have just bounced off his body, but really, really good catch, way to hang on to that ball. But a lot of people think because the way the NFL Films presents it, it looks like the game-winning touchdown, but it actually set it up for overtime. And then, like you said before, Carlos wins it barefooted in overtime.
Yeah. All right. And your number 5 was?
My number 5 is the 1998 NFC Championship game between Atlanta and Minnesota. It was one of those seasons where I really did believe in Minnesota in the NFC. I wasn't too sold on Atlanta, though they were really good. They'd played very well. Jamal Anderson was pretty much the backbone of that offense that year, but Chris Chandler it was really hard to believe in him until like late in the year when this just kept going and going. Because he just found ways to win. He had probably the best season of his career, and the defense played really good. But I expected, you watch Minnesota that year with all the receivers, Robert Smith, the way Randall Cunningham was playing, the defense was real good, and it just really never got the feeling like, boy, Atlanta's going to come in there and win. I really thought Minnesota would go to the Super Bowl, and I think they would have if Gary Anderson makes that field goal with like 3 minutes left. They're up 7. If they go up 10, I don't see any way Atlanta wins that game, but he misses the field goal, his only miss all year, and Atlanta goes out and ties it, and then they get their Anderson to get the game winner in overtime. I mean, just another brutal Minnesota loss in a championship game.
All right, I've actually got that one higher. So what are we at? My number 4, 1966 Dallas Green Bay. I think this is a largely overlooked game that was much better than the Ice Bowl. It was a 34-27 game. Green Bay was up 34-20 in the fourth quarter. Dallas had Dandy Don Meredith at quarterback. About halfway through the final quarter, they had a 3rd and 20. Meredith throws a 68-yard touchdown pass to Frank Clark, which made the score 34-27. The Packers desperately tried to run out the clock, failed miserably at it. Ended up Don Chandler had a punt that only went 17 yards, giving the Cowboys the ball on the 47 with 2:12 left. Clark makes another 21-yard catch. They actually drive down, get the ball inside the 10-yard line. Packers linebacker Dave Robinson recognized the play he saw from films, brushed Bob Hayes aside, stormed into the Cowboys' backfield, and basically engulfed Meredith, who somehow gets a wobbly sidearm pass away. But Brown intercepted the pass in the end zone. The intended receiver, I think, was Bob Hayes, but he was surrounded by a plethora of Packers defenders. There's a new word that I looked up today.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's your new word of the day.
Yeah, but when looking up the game, I did see a press thing from Vince Lombardi where he congratulated Robinson for making the play in the backfield, but in the next breath criticized him for being out of his assigned position. Another
That's
game
exactly
where Brett
right.
Starr proved his greatness. I mean, this might have been Bart Starr's, why do I keep calling him Brett? Bart Starr's greatest game ever.
That's just wrong.
I mean, he was 19 of 28,
definitely the
304 yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions, and he was sacked 5 times. I think Carroll Dale caught 5 passes for 128 yards in the score. Don Meredith ended up, I think, 15 for 31, 238, but touchdown and interception. But I think this is a game that is very underrated in the pantheon of NFL games. I think way too much is given to the Ice Bowl. I think the Ice Bowl was top 10, obviously, but I don't see where it was anywhere near this game. But
yeah, I would agree with you. I've got, like I said, I cheated a little bit on these. I grouped this one together with the Ice Bowl a little bit higher, but
well, you're a lot like Eddie
totally
DeBartolo. You cheat a lot. I mean, you cheat a lot to get your unfair advantage. Go ahead.
Here we go. So if you ask any Packer fan to define why Bart Starr is great, this is the game you have to point to. This was his career game. 1966, it was his MVP season. You think he only threw like 3 interceptions the whole year, and these are not typical Bart Starr numbers, But 4 touchdowns, 300 yards, this in a championship game in Dallas, and Dallas had a very fine roster. And, like you were talking about Dave Robinson, what a fantastic play. Completely left his assignment. It was totally not what he was supposed to do. He just went on instincts, like you talked about. I think he must have seen something on film, but he was able to disrupt the pass, and they were able to, get the interception for the win. But no, I totally agree. This is a very underrated game.
And the term game manager for a quarterback drives me nuts because Bart Starr was not that, and he proved that with those 2 championship games. I mean, game managers don't do that. When did Trent Dilfer ever throw for 4 touchdowns in a game to lead his team to a championship? I mean,
no.
Bart Starr, I think, is one of the more underrated quarterbacks in NFL history. I think a lot of people overlook him because of the decade he played in. Plus, there were so many great Hall of Fame players around him. But if you look at it, how many guys that would be considered top 10 quarterbacks didn't have great players and Hall of Famers all around them?
You can't penalize him for that. I would penalize him a little bit just because he didn't throw that much in comparison to his own era. But like you said, these were the 2 games where he proved that he was a great quarterback.
Yeah, but they also had guys like Taylor, Horning. They didn't have to throw the ball as much as everybody else.
Right, that's just it. He hardly had to do it.
But that's not his
so that's why.
Because you know what? If you'd have put Johnny Unitas on that team, Vince Lombardi would have turned him into the same thing Bart Starr was.
Most likely, because that was, when you think of the '60s Packers, you think of the whole machine, and it was, they just worked together as a team. They didn't really worry about individual numbers, individual accolades, and so it's difficult for a lot of NFL fans to get their minds around it that way. It doesn't, they're used to seeing guys with individual stats. That's not what the Packers were about.
Yeah, they were about winning championships. Kind of like New England. I mean, Brady gets the numbers, but outside of him and Gronk, I mean, if you look at the 15-year history of them, it's not like they've had a ton of guys putting up numbers all the time.
Exactly.
My number 3, I think this was a better game than the drive. That was the 87 AFC Championship, Broncos 38-31. I think it was a better overall game, a lot more exciting. I know everybody likes to look at the drive game as being the all-time game between these 2. But to me, this one was, Denver jumped out to, I believe, a 21-3 lead. Bernie Kosar comes back, leaves Cleveland to 4 second-half touchdowns. Denver took a late lead with just 4 minutes remaining on a 20-yard touchdown pass from Elway to Sammy Winder. The Browns then do to the Broncos what the Broncos did to them. They marched down the field. They're headed for what appears to be the game-winning score when Ernest Biner, who was a great running back, fumbles on the Denver 3-yard line with about a minute remaining. Denver recovers it. They take a safety to run out the clock at the end of the game, giving it a 38-33 score. But, I mean, this game, I think, was a flat-out thriller. And
it was.
I believe that it was the greatest AFC Championship game I've ever seen.
Yeah, really hard to argue with that. I mean, I've got one that I like a little bit more, but...
Well, you're wrong.
Oh, okay. I thought we weren't supposed to say that.
I'm just kidding. Yeah, but I was kidding and I laughed. You just said that I was going to lose that time, and you sounded mean. What's your number?
Sounded
3?
Mean.
What's your number 3?
Well, my number 4 is.
I gotta skip you again.
You keep skipping me. That's all right.
I'm sorry. It's lack of respect.
My number 4.
Hard at me.
Is a tie between the 92 championship game and the 94, both NFC championship games. The 92, I kind of felt like Dallas was in control the whole game. It was a great game. It's one of the more recognized great games of that rivalry from the 90s. But I really felt like Dallas was in complete control because the Niners just didn't have the defense that Dallas did in 92. And so, but 94, even though the Niners get off to a 21-point lead in the first quarter, Jerry Rice gets a touchdown right before the half. They're up 31-14. In the third quarter, it really had the feel like Dallas really had a shot to come back, and they did. They almost did come back in the fourth quarter. So I felt like that was probably the better game of the 3 championships that they faced 3 years in a row. But the 92, I didn't want to overlook the 92 as well. Both very good games. but I think the 94 one was the better one.
Yeah, I agree with that, but what I want to know is, should we just call this show our top 12 since you got 2 ties in here?
Yeah, I know. There's too many.
Go ahead and give us your number 3.
My number 3, the 2006 AFC Championship game, New England at Indianapolis. New England gets up to a 21-3 lead, and after Asante Samuel picks off Peyton Manning for a touchdown. And, if you'd watched that rivalry in the 2000s, especially, they played in 2003 and 2004, you never really got the sense that the Patriots were ever going to lose to the Colts. Peyton Manning was just bottled up by Belichick until this day, and he leads them to a 35-31 comeback. And boy, I mean, they scored from all over the place. The defense had to step up to stop Brady, get the ball back in Manning's hands, and they were able to go down and win the game.
All right. I didn't have it on my list, but it would have been just outside of the list. I just didn't feel like that. I think in most of these games, the 2 teams were just better than those 2 teams. I think New England was actually a little down that year. And really, I think Indianapolis, the year or 2 before, might even had a better team.
Well, the 06 team,
because the AFC
I
was
won't
pretty
say
weak.
It's crazy, but the 05 Patriots were definitely the down team. That was the year they had all the injuries. That was the year they had Troy Brown playing cornerback. The 06 team was actually really good. If you remember the week before, they beat the 14-2 Chargers in San Diego, a team that
but that was
if they
basically the
played
14-2 Chargers basically gave them that game.
Well,
you had the interception of Brady, then the guy tries to run it back instead of taking a knee, where if he just takes a knee, the game's over, and it's Indianapolis at San Diego probably.
Wasn't that the game also where I forget the name of their third down running back, but he made a really critical. There was an interception thrown, but he strips the ball, and or maybe it was Troy Brown that strips the ball and gets the ball right back to the Patriots. Maybe I'm thinking of a different game.
Yeah, I think that's the play I'm talking about. That was
game.
Towards the end of the game. I thought it was it Ronnie Harmon? Nah, it wasn't Ronnie Harmon.
Ronnie Harmon.
But it was
remember.
He's
number 33.
But I thought it was the last minute and a half, and I thought actually maybe both plays were in the game. I just remembered a defender from San Diego intercepting to clinch the game, and while he's running it back, it might have been Troy Brown that stripped him, and they get it back, and they go down and score and win the game.
Right. They only won like 24-21, but they were the only team, in my opinion, that was going to go into San Diego and win. And I thought they were still really good on 06. They were good enough to win a Super Bowl that year. But getting Bob Sanders back for the Colts, I think, was huge for their defense. What's that?
I said they were playing the Bears, though. That's what I'm saying. The NFL in 06 just wasn't that great. I mean, the best team was San Diego.
No, it wasn't that great.
Stupid not to win it.
No, but that's what I'm saying.
Those
3 teams are good.
Go ahead and go with your number 2. I'll give you 3 in a row since I screwed you already last time.
That's no problem. Well, I'm just going to be reiterating what we talked about. I had the Ice Bowl, but I wanted to mention the 66 championship game because that's a very underrated game. But it's really hard for me to put the Ice Bowl lower just because of how legendary it is. But, the Packers get off to a 14-0 start, 2 touchdowns to Boyd Dollar. And then from there, it was pretty much a defensive struggle, but it had a really cool play, the halfback option from Dan Reeves to Lance Rensel. It kind of surprised, I'm sure that surprised the Packers, and getting that 17-14 lead in the cold, nobody really expected it. And then Starr had to lead them down for, I don't remember how long the drive was. I want to say it was pretty close to 80, 90 yards. And, just a couple of trick plays on the run, trying to get people out of position, and then Starr with the foresight to be able to say, hey, you know what? The running backs can't get in there, but I can sneak this one in, and then they go and do it. Turns out Donnie Anderson actually scored on the first play, and it was Mel Renfro that him and I believe it was Jethro Pugh were laughing about it years later, saying, "Yeah, he actually scored on the first one, and we're trying to figure out what actually happened." And they're laughing, and they're saying, "Wait a minute, didn't he score?" And they're like, "Shh, quiet, don't say nothing, don't let the refs hear you." And then, they asked Donnie Anderson about, I did score, but I don't make a big deal about it. But he said it was probably better that it ended the way it did with Bart Starr. But, fantastic game. But, I don't want to leave off the 66 game because, like you were saying, that's a very underrated game. Very exciting game. High scoring especially for the era.
So I believe this. After I get my number 2, we're both going to agree on number 1. My number 2 is one you already brought up. That's the Atlanta Falcons 1998 NFC Championship win over the Minnesota Vikings 30-27. I think it's arguably the greatest game played in conference championship history. The matchup was also the first NFC title game between two teams that played their home games indoors, as well as the longest title game ever. The Vikings were, I think, favored by at least 7 points, fairly heavily favored. NFL record 556 points during the regular season, won their previous 9 home games by an average of 23 points, but could not pull away from the Falcons team that was coached by, like I said, a guy who I think should be in the Hall of Fame, Dan Reeves.
Definitely.
Randall Cunningham, who I think is very underrated as a quarterback. Everybody talks about how he ran around, but he was a great quarterback, and he proved it these years where he basically sat in the pocket and beat people. I think he was the MVP that year, threw for 266 yards, 2 touchdowns, ran for another. I mean, Atlanta had Chris Chandler, who was just as good, if not better, in that game. He threw for 340 yards, 3 touchdowns. And then it came down to one of the all-time great kickers in league history, Morton Anderson, winning the game on an overtime or on a field goal or 38-yard field goal to win the game. But before that, you had Viking kicker Gary Anderson, who I don't think had missed all year at the end of regulation, missed a kick that could have put him up by 10. Then Atlanta comes back, drives down, ties the game to send it to overtime where Anderson wins it. So that's my number 2. Number 1, since you're a 49er fan, I'm going to let you give number 1 because I think we agree on this.
Well, that's nice of you, Mike. But, I think we both agree the 81 championship game featuring the catch. I really think this is, I got no problem putting other games above games that involve my team, but this particular one, I can't think of a better NFC championship game or a conference championship game that I've ever seen than this one. It's featured everything, and what was really great about it was, Dallas was just expected to win. They may have been the better team just because the Niners were so young and relatively inexperienced. Joe was not Joe yet, and this is really where they proved that they were going to be a great team and ended up launching a dynasty.
Yeah, I agree. One of the greatest games I ever saw. And I was actually cheering for the 49ers in this game, believe it or not.
Well, because up to that point they hadn't won anything, and that's what you always said that you like teams like that. You like the Falcons, the Saints.
Yeah, I like the underdog. I actually cheered for the Giants the week before, and I think people forget the Giants gave them a damn good game.
Right, even with
they walked
the
through
backup quarterback in.
Yeah, and who was the favorite in this game? It was probably Dallas, wasn't it?
Dallas, I think, was favored, yeah.
Yeah, but Dallas was favored because they were Dallas. You had Tom Landry, the hat. San Francisco had been terrible for, 6, 7, 8 years?
Yeah.
Nobody really knew how great a coach Bill Walsh was. You also had the regular season game where the Niners beat the Cowboys, winning 41-14.
Yeah, there was about 45-14. And, after Dallas had destroyed them 59-14 the year before, a little bit of revenge there. But that was really the game where the people started to turn heads.
Yeah, and you look at the playoffs. The divisional playoff round, what Dallas did to actually a pretty decent Tampa Bay team, the 38-0, where they just obliterated Doug Williams. I think they sacked him close. Did they sack him close to 8 or 9 times? If not more.
It was something like that. It was bad. They really
they beat them 38-0. The Niners had a little bit of trouble with the Giants. I think they beat the Giants, 38-24?
Yep, that's right.
And I think it was one of those things, just like, I think it's another thing a lot like, say Carolina this year, where they go 15-1, but people still don't believe it until they win the Super Bowl, and then people will believe it. And really, with that Niner team in 81, their run game was pretty much non-existent. I think Montana was their second leading rusher, wasn't he?
Yeah, they they didn't have a whole lot that year.
I think Earl Cooper was the leading rusher, wasn't he? I think Earl Cooper was like 450 yards or something. Or?
He was their second one, and I can't believe his last name. I know his first name was Ricky, and for some reason I can't place his last name.
Well, I remember Bill Ring played a fair amount also.
Yep, Bill Ring played a lot. They had Earl Cooper, who later gets converted to tight end, but it wasn't Ricky Irvins, but it's something like that.
I think that Earl Cooper was the leading rusher. But
no, he wasn't. He was the year before.
And, to me, that's where the greatness of Joe Montana is that first Super Bowl win, because everybody always says, well, if you look at Jerry Rice, people don't realize he didn't have Jerry Rice to the third Super Bowl win?
Yes, that's correct. The first two Super Bowls, the receivers were Freddie Solomon and Dwight Clark. And Dwight Clark
which weren't bad receivers. They had Mike Wilson, who was solid also. Had Russ Francis as tight end, I think, in the second one. So, the greatness of Montana to me was the 81 season, where really it was the first season he started all year, I believe, also.
Yeah, 80.
And then Bill Walsh drafted all four defensive backs, didn't he?
Yeah, he drafted Ronnie Lott in the first round. 3 out of the 4 guys in the defensive backfield were rookies that year. And the second, Dwight Hicks was, he's the only guy with experience. They're going up against Drew Pearson.
Carlton Williamson. Wasn't it Carlton Williamson?
Yep, Carlton Williamson, Lott, and Eric Wright were all rookies that year. And all 4 of those guys
said he never won unless he had Jerry Rice and John Taylor. He didn't have Jerry Rice and John Taylor. He didn't have a running game. They didn't have a big tight end. No, they had a very good defense and a very good scheme, and they all happened to get hot at the right time.
Yeah, with the injury to their leading rusher, they had to go get Linville Elliott out of retirement. They had Amos Lawrence, who was their kickoff returner. He had some speed, but they were running Linville Elliott even on the final drive when Dallas switched to nickel, thinking looking for the pass. They're running end runs to Linville Elliott and gaining 8-9 yards a pop.
And I don't think people realize the game did not end with the catch. Dallas drives back, inside the 50?
Yeah,
what they did was one-on-one.
Yeah, Danny White makes a fantastic throw. There's about 58 seconds to go after the catch, and the first play he hits Drew Pearson between 3 defenders, and Pearson's breaking free, and he's probably going to go at least another 30 yards. There was another guy back there, but if he goes 30 yards, they're going to kick a field goal and probably win the game. But Eric Wright pulls him down, which would have been called a horse collar today, as we talked about the other day. But it was back then. That was that's how people tackled. And
it should have been called one, because then the Cowboys would have played the Bengals, and maybe everything would have turned out better.
Nah, they'd have found a way to beat you guys.
But so we agreed. Number 1 was Dallas, San Francisco, 1981, and they wouldn't have figured out a way to beat us because Danny White never could get over the hump either. So, because that Cowboy team, people forget, made the conference final 4 years in a row.
Yeah, they did.
80 through 83. Lost to Philadelphia. They lost to you guys. They lost San Francisco. They lost to Washington, and then they lost.
Yep, in 82.
Yeah,
83 was us in Washington.
Yeah, so they made 3 in a row.
Yeah.
What the hell? My math was a little off, but I'm from Indiana, so it's all right. If I'm close in Indiana, I'm getting an A in math. But
right.
And if you saw my grades in high school, you'd know I was never close, but because that would have been an A. So our number 1, we agreed, Dallas, San Francisco, 1981 NFC Championship game. Of course, we get the conference championship games coming up this weekend. Then we got 2 weeks of Super Bowl week on the Grueling Truth, where it looks like we're going to have former Pittsburgh Steelers starter Gary Dunn, who was on the great Steel Curtain teams in the late 70s and then played into the 80s with them. Gary Burley, who played with the Cincinnati Bengals, Super Bowl 16, very good defensive tackle, will be on the show.
Yep.
Dave Sidursky will be back with me on the boxing show, and we will have former bantamweight champion, defended the title 18 times, Orlando Canizales. And also next week we will have Skip Thomas's son, Dr. Def's son, to talk about his father. He's writing a book about his father's career and to talk about the work he's doing with his foundations. Make sure you check us out, Grueling Truth Facebook page, Stitcher, Spreaker, just about everywhere you can find good radio. You got any final words, Matt?
Well, I'm looking forward to the games this weekend. You know, we talked about a lot of the great conference championship games going back to the 60s. It's been a lot of really good ones. There's even been some good ones this decade and over the last 15 years, and especially this NFC game. I'm really looking forward to this Carolina-Arizona game. These are two teams that going into the year, I think both of us had a lot of doubts about. But, you know, both these teams have made believers out of me. You know, I don't know if Carolina is definitely like a Super Bowl team, but they could be. I think Arizona may be a little bit better, but they got to go into a tough place to win, and we talked about this on our Pick'em show. You know, this is a game I'm really looking forward to. This could go down as one of the better games that we've seen at least in the last 10 years.
Well, I think Denver-New England is very interesting just because of Denver's defense, their ability to put pressure, New England's inability to protect Tom Brady a lot of times this year. And the same thing the other way. You got an older Peyton Manning. Offensive line has not played great, especially the last half of the year against New England and Bill Belichick's defense. I think they're both going to be great games. Also, let me remind you to check out our sponsor, Gridiron Mo. It's a new interactive football app where you can sit with your wife and kids this weekend and guess the next play of the game and just see who comes out and does a better job on picking them. So make sure you check out Gridiron Mo at www.gridironmo.com. So for Matt Andrew Scavage, I'm Mike Goodpasture. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.
Still there?